if we judge and we assume our child is just being difficult for the sake of being difficult, I think we're missing a big point. They engage in things because they're drawn to them. And if we shift our assumptions about what we think our child is about and we kind of follow their lead, they'll show us what they're about.
Welcome to Tilt Parenting, a podcast featuring interviews and conversations aimed at inspiring, informing, and supporting parents raising differently wired kids. I'm your host, Debbie Reber, and boy, do I have a powerful episode for you today. We are going to be talking about the experience of today's kids and teens and what's different for them from when we were their age, and consequently, what has to be different for us as their parents and caregivers. Because as my guest, Dr. John Duffy, explains, we truly can't relate to the lives our kids are leading because they're facing many more stressors than we ever face just by virtue of the pace of their lives, their access to technology, their connectivity to each other, and the technology at their fingertips. John is the author of the brand new book, Parenting the New Teen in the Age of Anxiety, a book which, by the way, I devoured. And what I loved about this book and about the work John is doing is that he's helping parents like us know how to truly show up in the way our kids need us to, how to be the support they need, how to tune into their emotional lives, how to create a culture of emotional wellness in our homes, and so much more. This is a really thoughtful conversation with a lot of takeaways. And even though John's book is aimed more at parents of teens, everything we talk about is germane to parents with kids of any age. And as we all know, all kids grow up. So hearing what John has to share can help you be better prepared when your children enter adolescence. Before I get to our conversation, I have a few quick announcements. First, there are several new supporters of this podcast that I want to give a shout out to. So a special thank you to Cecilia McMullian, Monica Croak, and Amy Kendall. Thank you for being a part of this community and for helping support the production costs for this show. I am so grateful for your help. And if you too get a lot out of Tilt Parenting and would like to make a small monthly contribution to help fund the show, it's easy to do. Just go to patreon.com/tiltparenting and sign up. You can pledge $10, $5, or even $2 a month. It all helps. Again, that's patreon.com/tiltparenting. Okay, so that's enough of the announcements. Here is my conversation with Dr. John Duffy. Hey, John, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Debbie. It's good to be here.
It is good to have you here. You know, I just finished reading your book. I really enjoyed it. I think it's obviously super timely for what our teenagers are experiencing today. And it was really eye-opening for me. So I'm excited to share this with my listeners who, as you know, are parents raising neurologically atypical kids. So probably kids that even more than your average teen are dealing with anxiety. So as a way to get into this, I always like guests to just take a few minutes to introduce themselves. And within that, could you tell us about why you took on this book and why you wanted to write it?
Oh, I would be happy to. Thank you. So I am a clinical psychologist up here in Chicago, and I've been practicing for about 25 years. And I honestly never, if I'm being completely transparent, never really intended to work with teenagers. My plan was to work with high-functioning adults, nice and easy practice. And my first, when I opened my practice, my first referral resource was a social worker at a high school. And then my second was, and my third was. And I realized, boy, I really love these kids. They've got remarkable strengths that often go untapped. And even when they are depressed or at their worst, when they're super anxious or angry or defiant, there's still some spirit there that I really love and admire. So I've enjoyed my entire career working with them. About 8 years ago, I thought, oh, you know what? I want to write a book that's a little guide to parents just based on what I see in session. And that was called The Available Parent. I'm really proud of that book. And that was really about parenting free as we can of our own fear, our own judgment, and our own ego. And really, I kind of left it at that, like, if you can do that and stay in that lane, then you're available to your kids in the way they need you to be, and you're fine. So that came out in 2011. And in the last 8 years since then, maybe 4 or 5 years, there's been such a dramatic shift in the landscape of adolescence to the point where I think the talks we were saving for 12 or 13, we now have to have at 8 or 9. Adolescence now stretches, in my mind, to the early 20s because a lot of the challenges of adolescence we have trouble meeting because of what I call in the book identity traffic and a few other factors that plague the late adolescent. And I do think that these kids are dealing with a whole new set of stressors that no other group of teenagers before them has had to deal with. And even the stressors we dealt with when we were kids, they're amplified now in ways that I think a lot of people in my generation, a lot of parents just don't have a good grasp on. And so that's why I wrote this second book, Parenting the New Teen in the Age of Anxiety, to kind of just highlight that for parents. Here's some of the stuff you don't know. Here's some things you can do with that. And more stuff is going to come along that you don't know. And so here's a way to talk to your children about that as well as those things rear their heads, because some of this stuff is really scary. And I'm struck by what we don't know as parents.
Well, what you just said in terms of teens dealing with things that we as their parents can't really relate to, that, when I started reading the book, that's what really just stayed with me the whole time. Many years ago in a past life, I used to write self-help books for teenagers. And so I thought, well, gosh, I really struggled with the elementary school years. But once my son hits the teen years, I am going to be, good to go because I get these kids, right? And and so I'm reading your book, and you just really paint a picture that really shook me. Like, we really don't have a clue, like what our kids are really going through, the depth of, you talk about their psychic pain, like the depth of what they are experiencing is something we can't relate to. So can you talk a little bit about that? What is it that we're not getting that could really be affecting our kids that we have to wrap our heads around?
I'm so glad you focused on the psychic pain piece, because there's a number of things, that we see our kids doing. They're on YouTube, they're on their phones, they're disengaged somehow, they're up in their rooms. There's these behavioral things that you kind of notice. And parents can ask questions about that. And I kind of talk a lot about those things and the vaping and all this other stuff that's kind of hitting the headlines now. But the psychic pain, that more than anything else is what I want parents to be able to recognize has changed and shifted dramatically in the last few years. And there's a number of reasons in my experience for that. One is that kids are super aware today of the idea of mental illness and mental wellness. Mental illness in particular, they know what it means from a very young age to be depressed or anxious or suicidal. They certainly know what ADHD is. They know what the medications for these things are. Kids play de facto therapists for one another via text or Snapchat or Instagram late into the night, a lot of the time, unbeknownst to the vast majority of parents. So there's this empathy that I really admire in them that I do not remember having when I was a kid. I think I highlight that in the book. Mm-hmm. But I think they are taking on emotional challenges that their young minds are entirely unprepared to take on. And that part worries me quite a bit for these kids, because whether they're prepared or not, they're taking them on. And I think they're doing it in a real stealth way that we moms and dads are having a very hard time tracking. And so when our child comes to us with attitude, we assume that's attitude. We assume that's defiance, as opposed to the accumulation of all this psychic trouble that they're carrying around.
Yeah, and I think about a lot of differently wired kids already. I feel like tend to move through the world with a heightened sensitivity. Often these kids feel things more profoundly. They might be overly empathetic or just very sensitive to energies around them and taking it all on. And so, when I was reading that, I was like, wow, these are kids who already are wired to struggle in this area. But now they're growing up in a society where that is almost, double the impact on them.
Absolutely. And they're so much more socially aware, in part because of all the information they have access to, which is, in effect, all the information. I mean, now that they're carrying the internet around in their hands, and a lot of kids are exceptionally well informed. So if something's going on somewhere on the planet, they're aware if there is suffering happening, and they feel that in a way that I think a lot of us, when we were teenagers, were kind of blissfully unaware of. There's that idea that those teen years are almost by definition egocentric, and we're working on developing a separate identity for ourselves and a sense of confidence and resilience for ourselves. And that's the challenge of those years. Well, kids are working through all of that for sure, but they're also taking on, all the world's problems, and they're wondering, like, am I ever going to make any impact on any of this? Will I ever have the agency over any of this? Or the awful things that I'm hearing about, am I just kind of stuck with, being kind of enfeebled and disempowered to do anything about that? Will I be able to take care of my family? So they have this kind of like long range view that I think a lot of us had a cushion away from when we were younger. Somewhere in the book, I mentioned the disappearance of the tween. The reason I bring that up is that I think that cushion between childhood and adolescence that a lot of us had the luxury of, kids don't have that luxury any longer. They move very quickly and abruptly from the innocence of childhood and that lack of self-awareness and that lack of awareness of mental illness or suffering to kind of a pretty hard stop in this awareness, like, oh, I think I might be depressed. I don't like the way I look, and this is happening at 8 or 9 or 10, not 12 or 13 or 14 now. And those young minds are really not very well prepared to take that on, so they get overwhelmed pretty easily.
And so also, as you're explaining that, I'm thinking about the fact that as parents, we're also getting messages, we're reading books about the teenage brain, and, part of being a teenager is taking risks. And, we read, I'm a big fan of Julie Lythcott-Haim's book, How to Raise an Adult. And so that's always in the back of my mind, like, okay, how do I build scaffolding to support this child, but give them, that sense of agency? And, so I think many of us are trying to do what those are still kind of old playbooks in some way, if they're not taking into account the levels of anxiety that most kids are kind of moving through the world with.
I think you're right. I think that's the trick of parenting today. I love Julie Lythcott-Haim's book as well. And she spoke at the Todd and Kathy's conference last year, and I got to meet her and talk to her about this a little bit. And she would agree that, yes, you want to build that scaffolding, but there are new challenges to that. So there's this little bit of a high wire act in parenting where you want to create some degree of safety. You want to keep communication open, but you do have to be informed about some of the challenges, at least, that your child is facing, because a lot of them they're facing without your awareness, in complete silence, in the dark, in their room, or with their friends. And so when they present a certain way to us, we can make easy assumptions that, oh, you're just being obstinate, you're being difficult. Why won't you focus on school? Why won't you sign up for the thing? Why are you making life so difficult? Without recognizing, oh, they're already reaching the end of their bandwidth before you even get to them, And so we have to recognize that as parents, and they're not going to tell us every little bit of what's going on in their minds, but they need to know that they can. And that's a point I try to make kind of consistently throughout the book is, do not expect that your child's going to be completely transparent with you. That's not a hallmark of the teenage years, but to know that they can be, and to know that if you have something you need them to understand about, the world that you get that you think they might not get, you need to establish a lot of goodwill between the two of you in order to make that message heard. Otherwise, they're going to trust what they're reading and hearing and seeing from peers or online at Reddit or with each other on Snapchat.
And is that the emotional bank account that you're talking about there?
Exactly.
Can you explain that to listeners?
Yeah, I've for about 20 years, I've been looking for another phrase that I think suits the dynamic between parent and child. And I've come up with nothing more effective than something I read in Daniel Goleman's book, Emotional Intelligence, 23 years ago, The Emotional Bank Account. And effectively, every one of our relationships carries an emotional bank account, and that's kind of the sum total of our interactions and whether they are positive or negative. And if you've got net negative interactions, you've got a bank account that's in the red, and your interventions in that relationship, whether it's parenting or an intimate relationship or a work relationship or a friendship, is going to be far less effective than if you've built up a lot of positive interactions so that you are in the black. And that's the good stuff of parenting, is the more you spend time connecting in a genuine way where you're not just collecting intel or looking at portals, but you're talking to your child, you're getting to know his or her world, you're understanding their music a little bit better, you're understanding the culture of their class a little bit better. The more you understand and the more they know that you are curious and interested and still have positive regard for them, that bank account's in the black, and the interventions that you execute as a parent are far, far more likely to be effective. And if they're in the red, you are going to find yourself super frustrated because you can read a Debbie Reber book and a John Duffy book and a Julie Lithcott-Hames book and still feel like, I'm not getting anywhere here.
Because there's no trust there.
Yes, exactly.
So what if there are people listening who are recognizing that this emotional bank account is probably very much in the red? Is it possible to turn things around, and how would you even go about doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. 100% possible. One of my favorite examples happened in my office recently. A mom recognized, like, oh, I get why you don't listen to me. You know, I come down really hard on you. I'm not a very good listener. So she copped to all that. She said, effectively, I don't like the way I've been in our relationship. And I apologize for that. And I want to get to know you. I want to understand your world. I don't want to take any risks with your well-being. I love you too much. It's too important. So even if you have really hard things to say to me, I'm going to work harder than I ever have to listen and to be an ally to you, as opposed to working against you and you feeling like you can't talk to me. So she kind of hit this really, really elegant reset with her daughter. And her daughter responded beautifully and said, I really appreciate that. You know, like, and this is a 16-year-old talking to her mother. It was really something to witness, but I learned a lot there because it was like, oh yeah, it isn't too late. You can always come back to it and say, this hasn't gone very well, has it? You know, and if you're meta about it like that and you're not defensive, I think you can get movement very, very quickly. And the emotional bank account is super malleable. So you can move from the red to the black in the course of an hour. I watched it happen, you know, and it is a lovely thing to see happen. And you get hope very, very quickly.
Yeah. And that requires a level of vulnerability on the parents' part too. But I think our kids, because they are so sensitive, they are able to tap into that right away. Yes.
And as a cautionary note, it can go the other way too. You know, I'm thinking of a father and son I worked with not long ago where dad decided to launch into a lecture because he had, you know, his son's attention in a session, and you could watch the lights go out in the son's eyes. Mm-hmm. And I could feel like that bank account draining. And, you know, so I intervened, but left untouched, that would have created, I think, a lot of frustration and division between them. And there's never been a time when our kids need to know that emotional bank account is available and that you are available to them. Now more than ever, they need to be aware of that.
During this month of planning and organization for big transitions, rhythms and routines have been absolutely essential for our physical and emotional well-being. So Green Chef nights are reliably and predictably a good night. We know the ingredients will be fresh and prepped, the instructions easy to follow, and the meal delicious. We're all still talking about last week's turkey tacos with mango chimichurri sauce, refried beans, and Monterey Jack cheese. Green Chef contributes to a healthy lifestyle with easy and delicious menus like fresh seasonal salads and grain bowls. And with over 80 weekly meal and market options, plus rotating options to suit a variety of lifestyles, whether Mediterranean, plant-based, calorie-smart, keto, protein-packed, gluten-free, there are always plenty of options to choose from. Whatever you select, you'll get farm-fresh ingredients, organic whole fruits and veggies, and premium proteins, all delivered straight to your door. I love those 4 words. Straight to my door. Oh, and one more thing I love about Green Chef, they have an app, which means it's easy to manage meal preferences and delivery from your phone if you want to. And I, for one, want to. I am in that mode where I'm making the most of little moments like waiting in line at the pharmacy or for the F train to pull into the station to tackle all of those to-dos. So the convenience of an app is key for me. Green Chef has a special offer for Tilt listeners. Go to greenchef.com/tilt50 and use code TILT50 to get 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months. That's 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months when you use the code TILT50 at greenchef.com/tilt50. Maybe I've watched too many seasons of The Amazing Race, but every time I have to go somewhere on the subway, I treat it like a competition. It's all about making the right gut decisions about which route will get me there the fastest. Sometimes those decisions get me where I'm going early, and other times my gambles don't really pay off. Probiotics can't help with most gut decisions, but if your gut needs a little support, Ritual has your back. Their Synbiotic Plus, a 3-in-1 supplement, has clinically studied prebiotics, probiotics, and a postbiotic to support a balanced gut microbiome. I've been using Synbiotic Plus for about 6 months now, and it's become a core part of my morning routine. I take the mini capsule every morning while making my way through my inbox, whether I'm at home or I'm on the road, because it doesn't need to be refrigerated. And the capsule itself is delayed released, which helps it survive the harsh conditions of the upper GI tract for delivery to the colon, and that's exactly where we want it to go. Ritual invested in a study modeling the human colon, which showed that Synbiotic Plus significantly increased microbial diversity and the growth of beneficial bacteria. There's no more shame in your gut game. Synbiotic Plus and Ritual are here to celebrate, not hide your insides. Get 25% off your first month for a limited time at ritual.com/tilt. Start Ritual or add Synbiotic Plus to your subscription today. That's ritual.com/tilt for 25% off. So what then, you talk about a parent's need to listen, support, and understand without judgment. And that's something I'm really working hard on at this moment in my life. And I'm just wondering, I don't know what that looks like. Does that mean no matter what they say, we just kind of continue to listen and hold a space for them? Maybe you could give us an example if a child is really unloading some emotionally difficult stuff. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. So let me think of an example that doesn't present any identifying information. A couple years ago, I worked with a young man. He was vaping and smoking pot. He was DJing. In other words, like he was trying to rap and DJ in the basement instead of doing homework. He was difficult. And so his parents were angry at him. Why aren't you doing your homework? Why are you wasting your time with this nonsense? Are you kidding me? You tell us you want to go to college. You're doing nothing to support that idea. And so there's a lot of judgment that came in. In fairness, if you think about it, that all feels really, really reasonable from a parent's point of view. And I don't know if it's reasonable to say extract all that judgment. But I think it's important to recognize our children aren't just trying to test our acumen as parents. And sometimes I work with parents where they really feel like that's what's at play here. More, they engage in things because those things support their well-being or their self-esteem, and they might not have other areas of their life in which that happens. For this young man in particular, that pot smoking, juuling, vaping crowd was really, really welcoming to him. And he was struggling to connect socially with anybody else. He had tried out for a team that he did not make, and he thought that was going to be his saving grace and his social life, and it turned out not to be. And that group was super welcoming to him, that was just hanging around in the basements. And this making music was kind of a replacement for him for the athletics. And it wasn't a full replacement, but he felt decent about himself, knowing, I can create something from scratch. It might not be great, but I like the idea of that. So I encourage the parents, well, don't shut that down altogether, because do I think he's going to be a DJ or a rapper? Maybe, but probably not. But is there a seed of something being sown there that is meaningful to him? Yes, probably. You know what I mean? There's some creative element that he is drawn to. And if we shut that down, we might be creating more anxiety and more distance than we want to. So that's where taking the judgment away is super important, because if we judge and we assume our child is just being difficult for the sake of being difficult, I think we're missing a big point. They engage in things because they're drawn to them. And if we shift our assumptions about what we think our child is about, and we kind of follow their lead, they'll show us what they're about. And one note to parents, there's an awful lot of this stuff where kids are trying to be DJs, or, I'm going to be Insta famous, or something where parents think like, oh my gosh, that's so soulless and awful, and I so don't want a child who's involved in this. Ask your child what they're drawn to about it, and you'll learn that there's something interesting there. But if you make assumptions, the more assumptions you make, the more off you probably are. I worked with a mom recently, and she said her daughter came to her 15-year-old daughter and said, I'm kind of bummed out about Sundays. I hate Sundays. And the mom thought, I'm going to align with her, and I'll share that I hate Sundays too. Oh, I get it, honey. That kind of Sunday night blues, you're not looking forward to the week. But she held back, and she asked her daughter, well, what do you mean? And she said, and she didn't mean that at all. Her take on that was completely different. So if I had gone forward and said, I know exactly what you mean, she would have missed everything that her daughter meant. And that's a great example of, if we think our tool for connecting comes from our mouth, we're probably missing the boat. If we think it comes from our ears, we're getting a little closer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a great example. I mean, you like the word curiosity, as do I. And I think that's just such a great reminder to just lead with that, to always be asking why and going deeper and not getting our own baggage enmeshed in what's going on. When you're talking about anxiety in the book, you write that as parents, our anxiety can create more anxiety in them, our concerns about the future, the fears that we have for who they are. So how do we kind of temper our own knee-jerk reactions, our own fears and anxiety, especially with that kid who, to an outsider or to us might look like they're really failing big time and going nowhere? Yep.
That's a really, really crucial question, because I don't begrudge any parent their anxiety. I think that's kind of the sign of a really good parent who worries about their child, wants their child to be happy and successful. I think that's what we all want for our kids. And so I think in order to manage our own anxiety, it's important to talk to our partners about like our fears and our anxieties, not even in the extreme. I often encourage parents, even when things are going pretty well, stop in and see a therapist on occasion and work through your feelings. So somebody who knows parenting pretty well, and talk about what your insecurities are, what your fears are, what your anxieties are. The only place I encourage parents not to bring that is to their relationship with their kids, because I want parents to recognize that your children are already pretty anxious. Just by virtue of being their age right now, there is an awful lot of anxiety, and coming from a whole bunch of different places in their lives. Most every significant area of their lives carries some degree of anxiety, and in a cumulative way, they don't have space to take on yours. So anywhere else that you can share that, and I love there's a group here in town of parents that get together and they just talk about parenting teens, and I will probably be speaking with them in the next month or so, and I think that's so beautifully adaptive to the times, because it's difficult and it's different to be a parent now than it ever has been. So to talk about okay, I found this in my child's inbox or in my child's backpack, or I'm worried about this, you're usually going to get some nods from other parents, that where it's like, yep, me too, let's talk about that, how do we ease our minds, or let's brainstorm, what's the best way to handle this without adding to the anxiety our children are already carrying, but also addressing our concerns. We don't want to be completely disempowered as parents. So I love the idea of parents empowering each other and brainstorming together in this new age, because I feel like in a lot of ways, just like kids are pioneers in that they're the first to have been brought up with social media and some of the academic and social pressures, we parents are also pioneers. We're the first to go through and raise people in these circumstances. And I think it's fair to say, you know what? Sometimes I'm going to need a little consultation on this. I don't think I'm always going to be able to do this on my own. And there's nothing wrong with that. I love when parents seek each other out.
I love that. I never thought of it that way, but something I'm often telling my child is, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I've never raised a teenager before. I'm totally new at this. So yeah, I think that leaning on each other is really important. Hey there, it's Debbie. I love making this show and sharing conversations about how to support our awesome neurodivergent kids. I've seen how even one little insight from an interview can spark a big shift in daily life. But I know that raising complex kids can be messy and lonely. And just when we think we figured it out, something comes up that boots us right back to feeling overwhelmed and stuck. That's why I've poured everything into creating a way for parents like us navigating complex parenting journeys to join together and chart a path that feels positive, hopeful, and doable. It's the brand new Differently Wired Club experience. In the club, you'll get personal support from me and other seasoned parent coaches, 6 live calls every month where you can connect and get your personal questions answered, the opportunity to learn directly from authors and experts like I have on this show, monthly themes for getting specific and tactical, an exclusive private podcast feed, and the best, most generous community of parents. Seriously, these folks show up for themselves and each other, and that right there is really everything, because it's a daily reminder that we're not alone. Our kids aren't broken, and we have totally got this. The recently rebooted Differently Wired Club is on a brand new platform with its very own iOS and Android app. It is such a great space. However you learn, whatever your style, no matter the ages, genders, and neurodivergent profile of your children, the Differently Wired Club can help you cultivate the positive shifts you're hoping for. Join us today by going to tiltparenting.com/club. That's tiltparenting.com/club. I hope to see you on the inside.
Lynn, this time of year, parenting can be such a flusterclux.
You've come to the right place. I'm Lynn Lyons, and I've been treating anxious families for over 30 years.
I'm Lynn's sister-in-law and co-host Robin Hudson.
Join us for Flusterclux, a podcast for parents who worry.
Wait, that's everybody.
Yeah, these last few years have felt like one long anxiety attack for so many.
Why do you think parents are always surprised that a podcast about anxiety relates to them, even if no one in their house has an anxiety disorder?
Well, worry is human. Everyone does it, and anxiety shows up when we face uncertainty.
All the parenting tips you've taught me have been essential.
I love to break it down into skills we need to manage worry in our families.
We've covered so many topics: depression, burnout, meltdowns, perfectionism.
Don't forget scary mothers-in-law.
Right, but of course that's not my mother-in-law.
Because that's my mother.
And a listener.
As a psychotherapist, I like to teach parents and kids how to respond to everyday moments in healthy ways.
Managing anxiety really can be taught.
It really can. And I'll even tell you what to say.
We talk about serious stuff but without being too serious.
Anxiety wants everything serious. Anxiety doesn't stand a chance when we're laughing, even about the tough stuff.
So you mentioned the word disempowering. In your book, you talk about that there are ways we can both empower and disempower our kids who are struggling with anxiety. So can you give me an example of what each of those would look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So the most empowering thing I think a parent can do is to let their child know underneath it all that they trust that their child has good instincts, is heading in the right directions, and is competent and resilient. I hang on those words for dear life because I think at the end of the day, when our children are 17 or 18 or 22 or 24, if they move out of our house and they go on to their next adventure and we can say that person is competent and resilient, they're capable and they know it, and they can handle a difficulty if it's thrown their way and they know that, I'd say that's a pretty solid parenting win. So if that's the vibe that we present to our kids, I'm not sure that this test is going to go well, but I know on the whole, you're on the right track, and I have faith in you that things are going to work out, and I think that's a vibe that parents can give their kids pretty readily. I also think it's a vibe that you can extract pretty readily. I think the more we try to clamp down and control our kids, whether that is, show me your homework. I'm going to track you on the portals. I'm going to reach out to your teachers. I'm going to track your phone when you go out. Not that I'm against that altogether, but I think that can be disempowering at times. Anything that tells our kids, I don't know if you've got this, so I'm going to be a manager here. I'm going to be the general contractor, and I'll be controlling your life behind the scenes. I'll be texting and emailing your teachers or your coaches, and I will be right next to you at the job interview so that you never really feel empowered to do anything on your own. And then when that child leaves the house at 17, 18, 19, or 20, that child might have difficulty. I work with a frightening number of college freshmen who are back on my couch by Thanksgiving or even Halloween, wondering how did I dysregulate so readily? Why did I stop going to class? Why did I start drinking so much? And a lot of that has to do with never having been responsible and accountable for their lives ever before in the past. And then suddenly they're thrust into this new environment and they cannot manage it.
Yeah, I was really shocked. I think one of the statistics you mentioned in the book is that around 30% of freshmen don't go past the first semester. That was really surprising to me and daunting. I think so many of us think, oh gosh, all right, we just need to get them to launch and then, we'll be home free, but that's not really the case.
No, I would love to say it is, but launching, I think, has changed over the past I'll say the past 8 years. I would argue that, I think a lot of us would say 8-10 years ago, if we get our kid to the 18th birthday, and we drop them off at, whatever college it is or whatever apartment it is, we've done our jobs. We can wash our hands and say, hey, we just won parenting. Brilliant. Brilliant of us. Now, our kids are dependent on us financially for a longer period of time. I think it is much more difficult to manage those challenges of adolescence in a timely way between 13 and 19. So I think that takes longer. And a lot of kids do have this empathy and this worldview where they want to make some impact. And so they may find themselves, even with a degree in their hands, thinking, I don't think I'm going to make any impact with this, or I don't think I'm going to make enough money to take care of myself with this. So I still need help, So parenting is becoming, if not a life sentence, certainly a longer sentence than I think we were led to believe when we had kids in the first place.
So for those of you who are listening for some reason who don't have children, this is a cautionary tale for you. But so I want to go back to something you said before. I really love the language of really expressing to your child and making sure they know we believe that they are resilient and competent. And it reminds me of the language that Ned Johnson and Bill Stixrud write about in their book, The Self-Driven Child. I trust you to make your own decisions and to learn from your mistakes. It's very much letting them know that you believe in them. So what if there are parents listening to this who want to say those words, but they don't believe they're true? What do parents need to do what kind of work do they need to do on themselves, or how do they get to a point where they can say that and so that they're not continuously sending the message that they don't think their kids are going to get there?
Well, I love your initial thought. What is the work they need to do on themselves? So sometimes we are, all of us, blind to what is driving us and what impact our behavior is having on the people around us. So I've worked with and known many parents, and I've been the parent at times that felt a need to be needed in a certain way in the life of my child, or in the life of our children. And so we may unwittingly at times create a sense of disempowerment or a lack of ability in our kids. I talk a lot about the vibe we set in our home and the messages we give our kids about themselves. And sometimes it is a handy feeling for a parent to have, to feel I'm necessary. My child, this particular child, just doesn't have the internal strength or the wherewithal to make it in the world on his or her own. So I'm necessary here. I'm going to be necessary in their lives for a very long time. And we create unwittingly, I think sometimes, and unconsciously, a role for ourselves over the long term where we're not necessarily considering like, maybe I should redefine what my role is in the life of my child and consider what my life is about, as opposed to just saying, I'm just about being a parent, and so I'm going to create the circumstances where that stretches almost ad nauseum into the future. I think it's important to recognize, what drives you and what role you play. The other thing is, I hope that makes sense. Mm-hmm. The other thing is to step back and really attend to your child's capacity to do things on his or her own. Capacity is different than action. I feel it's important to point that out because a lot of parents will say to me, there is no capacity. They wouldn't write the teachers if I didn't. But I always encourage parents like, okay, but they might do something. Why don't you take a step back, while they're in the comfort of your home and the risks are relatively low. They're not off at college. They're not on their own yet. Let's test out like how capable, competent, resilient they can be. Let's say they get themselves into an academic hole. Let's see if they can find their way out of that. And you can make yourself available as a guide and a consultant and an ally in every way, but they're the contractors. They're the ones who have to figure it out. Let's see what they can do. And let's give them the opportunity, at the very least, to try. And if they decide, I'm going to opt out altogether, let's give them the opportunity, and this is hard for parents, I recognize this, to fail. And to see what that's like, and to see what they do in the wake of failure. And sometimes I think most of us have needed that moment where it was like, oh, this went so much worse than I thought. I'm not going to let this happen again. That feeling of, boy, that went poorly and that's on me. We only need that once or twice in life, I think, in order to hold ourselves more accountable the next time. Because if we allow our kids that feeling, then we will support that depth of recognition that, oh yeah, this is on me. I have agency over this. I created this issue for myself. And I think next time it comes up, I can do something about it. I can mitigate it. There's power in that too. So there's even power in the loss or the failure if we're willing to allow our kids to experience that. And I think more and more parents are reluctant about that because of our own fears.
Yeah. And for, the parents listening to this podcast whose kids are differently wired. And so they, I guess, in thinking about the context of this question too, it's also about recognizing, where they are versus, compared to their same age peers. So you can still practice this and giving them, seeing where their capacity is, even with the scaffolding that you might have in place, and doing that removal of the scaffolding in a way that is appropriate for wherever they are, right?
I love that. And I'm really glad you brought up parents for kids who are differently wired. Right. It might feel like this metric might not apply to my children, but I think if you can adapt that a little bit, I think it absolutely does, and there is no child who can't find some degree of competence in what they can do. And the mistake or the misjudgment we make sometimes is we place unnecessary limitations on our kids, and they are sometimes capable of things that would really, really surprise us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great reminder. So just two more questions. One is, you talk about the vibe in the home, and that's something I talk a lot about too at Tilt Parenting is, the importance of creating a secure world for your child at home. So can you kind of explain what you mean by the vibe in the home and what we should be going for, and, maybe a tip or two on how we can create that ideal vibe?
Absolutely. So if you consider your child's world today, picture their day at school, if this is a weekday, picture their day at school right now. There is a lot of noise socially, academically. There's insecurities that they're carrying around. In their minds, there is noise. It is loud. Kids describe this to me every single day, literally, Debbie. And so at home, especially as they walk through the door, they need to experience some sense of sanctuary. There needs to be some peace and some feeling that somebody is there for me unconditionally, no matter how today went. Whether I want to talk to them in depth about it or whether I don't want to say a word about it, I need that time to kind of regroup because there's more I have to do today. I might have a job to go to. I have homework to do. I might have a play practice or swim, practice or something else I have to do. So I need a little bit of a reprieve. And I think moms and dads, more than anybody, can be that sanctuary for them. And now it's so critical because kids have precious little time in their lives where it's silent. They have very little time in their lives where they have the luxury of a little bit of regression. So I'm talking about kids as young as 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 being aware of everything that's going on in the world, all their insecurities internally. So everything external and internal, they're kind of hyper aware of, overwhelmed by. And if you can just imagine how important, crucial sanctuary is to the establishment of well-being and the idea of self-regulation, like emotional self-regulation, you're kind of introducing that idea when you create a vibe in the house that is calm as opposed to having a television on or having conflict the minute a child walks through the door, which just is more noise, you know what I mean? And more noise. And we want to give them at least some time during the day where they're allowed, for lack of a better word, to regress a bit, to step back, to be young and innocent and off the grid for a little while, even if it's just 20 minutes. That is refueling, rejuvenating, and regulating in a way that I don't think anything else could possibly be. It is so important to the well-being of kids today. I cannot emphasize it enough. And kids share with me that too often they step through the threshold of their home and it doesn't feel safe and it doesn't feel comfortable and it does feel like an interrogation. It does feel like more of the same. And their inclination is, I'm going to go up to my room, put earbuds in, and create more noise. And then so they're never really in touch kind of with themselves, emotionally, psychologically, and they're not regulating very well at all.
Wow. Thank you for that. It's a good reminder. And, even one of the tips you had in the book is just to have like soft music playing in the home. Like, I think there are really simple ways to create, just the other day we came home from school and I was like, well, I'm getting into pajamas now. I don't know about you,
Yes.
And that can instantly change the energy
Right,
in the
right.
home.
Briefly, I work with a boy, 17-year-old boy, tough kid, multi-sport athlete, guy's guy all the way. In his room is a weighted blanket, scented candles, essential oils, and the Calm app on virtually all the time. And this is like brilliant self-regulation. And recently he described to me 3 other football players coming into his room. And he's like, oh no, I'm going to get mocked so brutally for this. And they were all like, where did you get the weighted blanket, man? This is great. So he was everybody wanted a piece of whatever piece he's found. It was really lovely and profound.
That's great. That's great. Well, before we go, you have so much experience and a lot of wisdom to share. So I'm just wondering if you have any last parting words of advice for parents who are listening and this conversation is really resonating with them and they want to make a change in the culture of their family. What would that be?
It would be, if you listen to just our discussion here, you'll find that it is never too late to make a change, no matter how frayed or damaged you feel like your relationship is with your child. You can always reset in a meta way. Your child wants you and needs you in his or her life, regardless of what they say. 99% of the time, I trust the kids are telling the truth. Well, if they say, I hate you, I want nothing to do with you, get away from me, do not believe them. They want you and need you in their lives. The other thing is to be gentle with yourself. This is a really interesting time to raise kids because you are raising a generation that is kind and sensitive and empathic and deep. They're also overwhelmed, anxious, depressed, and taxed. So if you can be a conduit for them navigating this space successfully and as happily as they can, you are doing amazing work as a parent. So be gentle with yourself and give yourself credit for what you are doing super well, and know that you can make adjustments for anything that you feel like, I can make a little movement here. But don't be too tough on yourself. Be gentle with it and be gentle with your children.
Thank you so much. That's just wonderful note to end this on. And so listeners, the book is Parenting the New Teenage in the Age of Anxiety, and I will have links on the show notes page. And John, is there anywhere on social media that you're particularly active that listeners can check in with you on?
Yeah. So my website will show all my social media and stuff. My website is drjohnduffy.com. I'm Dr. John Duffy on Facebook, at Dr. John Duffy on Instagram and Twitter.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Really happy to be able to share this conversation. We could have talked for hours. So I look forward to actually following your media tour for this book too, and listening to what other interviews touch upon, because there's a lot of great stuff in the book.
Well, thank you, Debbie. It's been absolutely a delight to talk with you.
You've been listening to the Tilt Parenting Podcast. For the show notes for this episode, visit tiltparenting.com/podcast and search for this conversation. If you like what you heard on today's episode, I would be grateful if you could take a minute to head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a rating or a review. Thank you so much for helping us stay visible so people who would benefit from the show can easily find it. If you want to support the show and help me cover the cost of production, please consider joining my Patreon campaign. To support the show, just visit patreon.com/tiltparenting. Lastly, if you aren't already part of the online community at Tilt, I invite you to sign up at tiltparenting.com on the box in the bottom where it says Join the Revolution. Every Thursday, I send out a short email with a quick note from me, a link to that week's podcast episode, and links to 5 stories from the news that week that are relevant to parents like us. Again, you can sign up and learn more about Tilt at www.tiltparenting.com.
Are you overwhelmed by the things that get in the way of you doing what you want to do? Are you looking for ways to simplify life to better align with your values? Do you want to create space in your schedule so you have room for more of the good stuff? Play, joy, relationships, gratitude, and more? If you answered yes to any of these questions, I invite you to check out Edit Your Life, a podcast to help you edit the unnecessary from your life so you have more room to enjoy the awesome. Through episodes with me, Christine Coe, and a range of super smart, compassionate, and thoughtful guests, you'll come away with big picture insights and practical ways to declutter your home, schedule, and mental space without getting bogged down by perfection. I have always believed that small moments and actions matter tremendously. My goal is to help you find agency and space in your life through doable baby steps that will leave you feeling accomplished instead of overwhelmed. Check out Edit Your Life wherever you enjoy your podcasts.